Welcome to our tutorial about customizing controls. Here we're going to use a more hands-on approach to manipulating data in our database. First, I'm going to select all controls, click Delete. Now let's also delete these controls as well. Let's resize our form bar also. Now I need a list box and two text boxes. We'll arrange them something like this. We'll also need a button. Next, I'm going to bring the binding source control in, and we'll establish the connection between our dataset and the forms controls. Let's talk about what should happen here. The list box will show a list of last names from the database. The two text boxes will display, respectively, the first and last names. We're going to make some changes and then save the data back to the database. First, let's connect our binding source to the dataset. Project Dataset, My DB Dataset. As you see, my database dataset control appears right here. Now I need to connect the list box to the dataset. I'm going to select Use Data-Bound Items. Now I'll select Binding Source 1, Team A, and now we'll select the display member and the value member. The display member will be a last name. The value member will be ID1. What's the difference between the display member and the value member? The display member is the data that the end user sees on the screen. The value member is the unique identifier that the binding source works with. Remember, we talked about the primary key in one of our previous tutorials? Well, here is basically the same concept. In order to distinguish this particular record from other records, we need some unique identifier. We can't really use last name because, for example, what if more than one person has the same last name? We're done with our list box. Now let's go to text box 1. We'll scroll up. Data binding. Team A binding source, name. The second text box. Team A binding source, last name. Lastly, let's go and make some changes to our code. We'll delete this block of code here. And let's select this block of code. I want to drag it down here. Let's delete these handles. Here you see on Form 1's load procedure that Visual Studio has created some lines of code. This code is actually from our previous tutorial. What happened here is that the table adapter used the fill method to load the data from the database into Team A's table of My DB dataset. Now we need to save our changes back to the database. This line transfers the changes we made back to the dataset. Right now it's got a blue line under it. Let's see what's wrong. You see we don't have an underscore here. Let's go back. Remove the underscore. That should solve the problem. Okay, the last line writes the changes back to the database. In our previous tutorial, we used the Update All method of the Table Adapter Manager. We can still use it. We just need to bring in the Table Adapter Manager. Let's go to Design View. This control was created and saved from our previous project by Visual Studio. I'm going to drag the Table Adapter Manager out. And as you see, Visual Studio adds a 1 at the end of the Table Adapter Manager. Let's go back to Code View and see how it works. Let's run our program. When I select a name from the list box, the first name appears in the text box on the left. The last name appears in the text box on the right. Let's change the first name from Tom to Bob and save it. Let's restart our application to be sure the change is registered. Surely enough, Mr. Allen's first name is now Bob instead of Tom. Let me comment out this line. Let's use the table adapter control instead. Period, update, open parenthesis, me period, my DB dataset period, underscore, team underscore A. Here we'll use the table update control, and we're only updating Team A's table. Let's run our program to see how it works now. We'll change Bob back to Tom and click Save. Let's restart our program to see if our change is registered. And surely enough, they did. This concludes our tutorial about customizing controls.